Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started this evening. As always, we're going to do our best to stick to the 60 minutes that we have in front of us this evening. And I think the first order is for us to approve the minutes from September 29th, 2021. Somebody make a motion.
I move to approve minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the September 29th, 2021 minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. The next agenda item that we've got for this evening is to review and discuss the task force recommendations. Before we jump into the recommendations, I just wanted to talk through a little bit of logistics. We started, I think, have a little bit of that conversation last time we were together. And just foundationally laying out, based on our discussion last time, our plan, our goal is to move forward with sending forth recommendations to the city council after this evening. So it's kind of our game plan. In order to do that, we are going to, the protocol is when we get to the place where we're ready to vote, it'll be based on majority, which is how we do it in all of our other boards and at city council. So just wanted to walk through those logistics a little bit before we got into our discussion. Sort of next in line there is we have the set of recommendations that was given to us at the last meeting. And then Al and Steve had sent forward an additional recommendation. And what I'd like to do is request a motion actually to bring those recommendations all into one set of recommendations. So then we can have a discussion about all of them moving forward. So if somebody would bring forward a motion to bring these two sets of recommendations together, so then we can move forward with the discussion with both, with both of them.
Don't move.
Get a second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to combine the two sets of recommendations. Discussion.
So I'm just not sure how we're combining them. Is it, we'll have one set and then it just continues as a document to continue into the next, or how are we combining them?
So the combination is that then it becomes one set of recommendations. So the set of recommendations that we had previously, I think there were three sort of broad areas. Al and Steve brought forward a recommendation around a framework. And what we'd like to do is include that in as part of the overall set of recommendations that we have a discussion about this evening, Cersei.
So it would become a number 4. Is that what you're saying? That
Yep.
there's
Yep.
the number 4.
That's correct.
Recommendation number 4 would be integrating the change management framework.
The equity change framework, yeah.
Oh, Steve, sorry, missed your hand there. Go ahead.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought the only recommendation is the first one. The others seem to be reports and a memo, not produced from the task force. The report is outlining activities that the city has undertaken before the task force was ever formed. And then the police accountability memo is a memo outlining things coming from the police department. So I thought that Tom was looking at the recommendations draft as what would go forward to the city council. I thought this other stuff was support documentation. And I could be wrong, but that's how I interpret it.
Steve, that's accurate, right? That those set of proposed task force recommendations draft. I think what you're asking is accurate. I also see that Tom has his hand raised. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I just wanted to confirm, Steve, that yes, there's a recommendations draft, but of course the draft is not remotely sufficiently robust to tell the city council all the details that it's needed to kind of make its decisions and recommendations. Therefore, the timeline and the accountability memo and these other documents were to be attached to the recommendations as further information to city council as part of the recommendations, including that's why the equity lens would also be included as to further flesh out what it means to have an equity lens. So that would be the theory of it, to have a straightforward approach to recommendations, but also the supportive documentation as well. So that, but they can, I wouldn't separate them. The recommendations is combined with these documents that provide support and information that would be important for the city council to be aware of.
Other
So the
discussion.
proposal that we would
Sir-
vote on. I'm
Cersei, go ahead. Go ahead, Cersei. I think I spoke over you. What were you saying?
I hadn't raised my hand. I apologize. I was just trying, I'm still trying to understand what we're saying. So we'll go basically step by step through the recommendations, or do now we need to make a vote, a motion to amend? Like how will we actually talk through these recommendations?
We're going to talk through these recommendations after we move past what's currently been proposed, which is to combine these two to become one set of recommendations. And then once we do that, we'll move into discussing all of those recommendations, and we can talk about them 1, 2, 3, and 4 once we get past the motion that's on the table, Cersei. Any other? Do you have more questions? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I actually I don't support that. I don't support these recommendations as drafted. So this is time for discussion, right? Discussion on the motion.
The motion is to combine the recommendations to be one set of recommendations. Once we get past that, then we'll open it up for discussions on the recommendations. And that's when you would talk about, I agree with this, or I don't agree with this. I would like to add this, or this is what I'm thinking about these recommendations. So currently what we're doing is the vote is to combine the two sets of recommendations to now become one set of recommendations to have discussion on. That's what we're voting on at this point. That's what we're discussing at this point, is combining those two. And then we'll move into a discussion after we vote on the motion that's on the table currently. So yes, we will talk about each one of those recommendations. Any other discussion? Okay. So all those in favor of combining the two sets of recommendations to become one set of recommendation, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no.
No.
Oh,
Okay. So we have, the motion has been approved with 2 noes. So now let's open it up for discussion about the set of recommendations. And it'll be important that folks raise their hands so I can make sure that we hear everybody's voice this evening. And I'll do my best to get to everybody first and then circle back around as you have more comments that you'd like to make. So that's kind of how we'll go about it. So with that, I'll open up discussion on the recommendations that have been presented. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you. So upon reflection of the first draft of recommendations that we discussed last time, Steve and I did interact and compose a recommendation that you now have included in the whole here. And I can speak to it kind of in an overarching way first, and then perhaps that'll inform the remainder of the conversation on more specific recommendations. A couple things. One is after reflecting upon the Equity Task Force conversations and the broad input received by people, and the summary of the activities of it that were laid out in, I think, what was now called the Marion Equity Initiative Summary. And also looking at the strategic plan, given the depth of this topic, we really came to the conclusion that there has been some discussion, but there's been little consensus, and that's okay. But really, in terms of making sure that things really do proceed with an equity lens, we propose that that in this case, that the city leaders deliberately adopt, adapt, and integrate the use of an equity change framework into all aspects discussed to date. That being an overarching framework to go deep without, we're not advocating a certain position on the remainder of things in that statement. What we're saying is we've talked a lot about evidence, we've talked a lot about policy, training, and a whole array of things in terms of change. But we came to kind of a point that I think perhaps we can unfold tonight, and was basically this. We fully believe that we need to be very diligent, focused in mapping and in our thinking, are we maintaining a clear, strong equity lens in all of this? And an equity lens in all of it was becoming noticed by us in another way, and that's called, just because we say we did a lot of things doesn't mean that we're really confronting the core issues. And so you might say, we want to make sure that we maintain an equity lens by adopting an explicit change framework that allows us to go deeper and not have a blind spot where we are just summarizing activity. And I think sometimes leave it finally with the question, to what extent is it possible to have a lot of activity and no deeper equity lens? My answer for myself personally would be, I've seen it too many times where a flurry of activity does not advance the core of what we're standing for. And so thus, that's the reason we put this piece out, that change is yes, an external force on things, but transitions that people make along the way are very much internal, and they need to grow by involving people wholeheartedly in this initiative. So that's a broad brush why this framework would be added, and with no commentary on the individual recommendations that would follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Others? Yes, Amal.
I'd like to say that this framework articulates a mindset that the city of Marion operates under. We do, through our policy development or programming for projects and for funding and budgeting, we do look at equity as an evaluative criterion to make decisions, whether we're instituting new fees or we're evaluating impacts or we're prioritizing projects. We do look from an equity lens, however, not articulated specifically and shared with the general public. But I do want to highlight the fact that we do operate organically under this proposed framework.
Thanks, Amal. Others? Jennifer.
I wanted to bring up that I did take the drafts to our Civil Rights Commission meeting that we had, and got some feedback that I wanted to make sure that I shared. And one of them was that the concern that it's focused too much on policing and not encompassing all of the issues regarding equity and inclusion. And so there was some concern about how is that, what else is going to be happening? Like we can't, this can't be all type of thing. And then also questions about when would these recommendations be open for public comment?
The public comment period, and Alicia or Amal will step in if I get this too out of whack, but once the recommendations are brought forward to the city council and presented to the city council, there'll be an opportunity for citizens and residents to participate in the discussion at that point. So, right, as we get the recommendations and we bring them forward for discussion, then that's an opportunity for folks to come forward to speak more about something specifically in this space. Is that accurate, Amal? Did I get that right?
Correct.
Look at that. Mark that down, please. Somebody somewhere. Okay. Somebody else. Cersei, did you have something? I don't know if I saw your hand raised or not.
I didn't have my hand raised yet. I was
Okay.
about to, but it would be helpful to me if we could maybe go one by one through here.
If you would like.
We're done with their general comments, yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
I think Jennifer had two questions. And I think you only answered the second one about when the public was going to be able to participate in the discussion. The first question had to deal with that it was the recommendations were emphasizing the policing aspect more so than diversity and equity. But these are not the complete and entire recommendations that would come out of the task force. At least I hope that's not, but some of that's still going to have to be deferred until all the policies and everything has been reviewed, and as well as the data collection, because there will be opportunity for other discussion or suggestions as a result of that.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yes, thanks, Steve, for pointing out that there were two questions there, and I think that is the one thing that we really want to make sure we have a clear understanding of is there's talk of the task force, needing to come to a close because we were done with the recommendations. But then, if that's the case, then is there going to be policing? Is policing going to be the primary focus of these recommendations and not include other aspects of equity and inclusion? And what does that framework look like? I also wanted to add that we did have discussion about about the Citizens Review Board specifically, and I did receive some feedback and just wanting there was not a consensus that came from the Civil Rights Commission. However, there was a member that did speak up about if that's not the case with having a citizen review board, then what is going to be happening? And so I would be putting out then that I would like to know what the what steps are going to be able to be laid out for us to have a structure that involves what to do in if there were to be a situation, so that we're developing something that is proactive instead of reactive, because we don't want to wait until a situation happens before we decide what to do as a community.
Go ahead, Chief. You're muted.
Sorry,
That's okay.
I was singing. I shut my mic off. But hey, Jennifer, I guess I'm curious. What did the Civil Rights Commission say that the police department has done wrong that we need to have somebody else doing something that I'm not doing or that the city's not doing already. And that's kind of where I'm a little confused when they say, put a process in place. Well, we've got a process in place. Are they saying it doesn't work?
I can answer that directly, right? Because I was
Yes,
addressed.
you bet.
Okay.
Yep, you sure can.
So it is not a matter of whether like that there's any belief that there's anything wrong, malicious, anything that has been done wrong. It's only looking at how can things be improved, and that they're looking at what was discussed is that it's more of wanting to be able to know like what are the processes and the ease of which and the transparency of which those processes are in place. So making sure that that kind of structure is very well developed and put out there and is public information, and accessible, I guess is the right word that I'm coming up with. So and not having it be kind of like a, well, if you happen to know someone, you might be able to say something type of thing, but having it be like, how does the community know that they have the ability to ask for A, B, C, and D, or that kind of thing. So it's just more of, it's not an all or nothing answer as far as if this group decides that we're having a citizen review board, okay, what will that look like is going to be the next question. If we're not going to have a citizen review board, what will we have in its place, and making sure that that is a very clear understanding. And
Yeah, I think I'm looking at the third recommendation about public education on transparency and accountability. And I think that to me covers a lot of what they're looking for. But again, I'll let somebody else talk.
It looks like we've got Cersei, Tom, and then Amal, if I got the hands in the right order. So go ahead, Cersei.
Thank you. Yeah. So we sent out a lot of data a couple months ago, August 5th, actually, in an email that you got, where we really did indicate, again, this is not that we are suggesting that the Marion Police Department is somehow surprisingly and importantly different and problematic in comparison to other systems. What we're actually saying is that from all the data that we have and from the data that we've seen from Marion specifically, there is nothing that would suggest to us that we are unique, that indeed all of the data we've seen, that there is disproportionality in the numbers of traffic stops and in the outcomes of traffic stops by race, that all the Iowa studies that have been done show Blacks are stopped more often than whites, that Black Iowans feel profiled by police, that in all of the places where we've seen the kinds of substantive research, it's pretty clear that we have patterns that we are as susceptible to as the rest of the country. And the idea that just because we don't quite have all the data, our own data infrastructure is still being developed, doesn't change the fact that there's nothing so far in any of our data or the testimonials that we've been hearing that would suggest we shouldn't be focused on the challenge of the historic disproportionate different experience that people of color have in Marion. Indeed, it's quite clear to us that there are differences by race and that we need to do something about it. I think we're pleased with many of the things that the department and that the city have been doing. They're definitely proactive measures. When we get down to the details and get to the discussions about the trainings that we're calling for, we can talk about the reasons why we're calling for more than what we're doing right now. The real key here is that at the moment, the way the system is set up is that an individual has to bring a complaint as an individual to the department or to the city. And what we're suggesting is that this isn't an individual problem, this is a systems problem. That we've got these historic patterns that we've got to get past as a system, and that we need some kind of entity that provides the systemic view of what is happening, and that we don't leave it to the individual to be the one to have to bring forward concerns or complaints. We have the opportunity for individuals to do that, and that's critical. But so much of this is not just an individual problem, as I noted. So the challenge we have here is that the data all suggests we have a problem in Marion. There's been nothing that's been demonstrated that we don't. And we really do need to be working proactively toward addressing that problem. It's not a problem just that the public doesn't know what they can and can't do. So, yeah.
Thank you, Circe. Tom Newkirk. Tom, I think you just threw up your hand too. We'll get you.
I did, thank you. Okay, I would note that one individual indicates we're too focused on policing, and then we are dealing with policing, which is the elephant in the room, and this Stumbo appropriately is commenting on the significant challenges dealing with policing, which is why policing is up front and center. I think that the chief's point that, first of all, the equitable policing approach is designed to not only equal but surpass what any citizen review board would actually do to reduce disparities. And the education section number 3, like Chief says, folds back upon it and provides this information to the community that then will make everyone aware of what they can do, going to the chief, reviewing the body cam footage, examining data, going to city council, et cetera. Okay, that's how it's supposed to kind of work together. And I would also note that it's not just focused on policing, because number 1 is about city policies and practices. So in effect, my friends, every single aspect of what the city of Marion can do in dealing with equity, diversity, inclusion, and potentially biased behavior is included in this simple 3-point recommendation process. I would say Ms. Stumbo is exactly correct on the data that exists in Iowa. And her point is well taken, that there's no reason to believe the city of Marion is any better or worse than the city of Iowa City or any other department. The chief, you have a great opportunity here in terms of the proactive nature of your city. The chief is clearly taking this seriously, and not every city has that, that's for sure. But what you have here is, the first question is, what would a citizen review board, as that has been defined and described by every other location, actually to reduce biased policing at a micro level? The answer is 0. It would only deal with the things that the chief reacted to, which is, are you suggesting that that we're doing something wrong, that we need a citizen review board to deal with police abuse, when there hasn't really been any of those instances occurring at this time? And the real issue, as Ms. Stumbo, in my opinion, rightly points out, is the operation of potential forms of implicit bias that can affect police decision-making about persons of color in any community. And the only methodology available today that any scientific foundation supports is A, the collection of data, B, the infusion of some level of accountability in terms of monitoring that data, in terms of and that means A, collecting the data, number 1, B, being able to examine the police cams, et cetera, that can create accountability at the individual officer level, and then increasing the training, which of course is what the city is going to be doing. That is it. Any other more detailed approach? I mean, I can tell you, I just got off a call today with Dr. Tony Greenwald, who is the father, the inventor of the implicit association test, where the word came from. And he is working on an article about remedies, and his sole focus is that you collect the data and you look at the outcomes at that time, and then try and find ways to deal with those outcomes. You're already doing that. This process recommendation does that specifically and is, my opinion, far beyond what other cities are going to be doing. You should be proud of that. Can you go farther? Sure. I don't know that you can go farther until you have the data and the training in place and the accountability measures and see if it actually works to do anything with that process. That's my only contextual point that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Amal.
Yeah, I would like to add that the question about public education, about rights, and about our processes is included in the recommendation that is on the table right now. And about the data in terms of determining whether there is a need for a citizen review board. I would like to point out that the data we have is incomplete, and I don't think we can deduct it to establish causation here. And until we have a good system that collect complete data, that and then we have enough information, if the data comes back and tell us, yes, everything we're doing right now is not effective, and the micro accountability approach we're taking is not effective, the city will consider setting a review board. We're not saying we're dismissing the concept. We're saying we don't have enough information to go ahead and spend public resources on setting something that we may or may not need.
Thanks, Amal. Tom Trehorn.
Yes, just to piggyback up a little bit on what Amal had indicated, and that is that, it seems with the citizen review board concept, we're going from 0 to 100 miles an hour with all of the other recommendations, and we have the process in place. When these recommendations come forward, the conversation is going to be highlighted in the community. There's going to be a great deal of conversation about what's going on and how people can have their any issues vetted, and that's through the Civil Rights Commission. And I think we've dedicated in the recommendation that that's something we want to promote, ensure people have access to, and have that available to them easily. And if that doesn't happen over a period of time, or the data comes back, it can be revisited. But the process to enact a citizens review board alongside with what we currently have, the education required to get the people up to speed, the timing, the applications, the pure process that will take is pretty rigorous. And I think to move in that direction just kind of circumvents some of the Civil Rights Commission's authorities and abilities, and it's almost like a dual purpose. Now, over time, if there's something that directs us that is not working and that we need to move in a different direction, that's certainly something that can be discussed. But to just throw it out at the very onset without the data, without the conversation, seems a little short-sighted when we already have a strained staff trying to get things accomplished, and we just go down the route of creating a whole new process. So I think highlighting it through this process is going to be key and essential, and a very, very big part of how these recommendations are rolled out.
Thanks, Tom. Cersei.
May I request that we start with number 1 and discuss number 1 and then vote on it, and then move to number 2 and do the same thing?
I'm going to actually vote on, I think, all of the recommendations, but I think it's a good idea to start and discuss number 1, and then we can move to number 2 and 3 and 4. I think we can start there and go from there.
I would strongly urge that we allow discussion and voting on the individual recommendations. I don't know that it makes sense to say, I mean, so I suppose you're saying I could like offer an amendment. I could make a motion to amend number 1.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to start? Would you like to start with number 1?
The first thing is number 1, that's not a correct link. The city progress is reflected in the attached report. It links you right back to this. So I think that what you're talking about there is the City of Marion Equity Initiative Progress Report. It's got the kind of the teal colored graphics. Is that right?
So to clarify, the software that our agenda is uploaded through broke the links and will not allow them to be attached. It is supposed to link you to the Equity Initiative report that's next on the agenda.
Okay. And so when this says the review of city policies and implementation of streamlined approaches to hiring and discipline will take 12 months. Can someone tell us what that review process is? The review of city policies and implementation of streamlined approaches to hiring and discipline?
Are you looking under number 1, Cersei?
Yep,
Okay.
the second sentence under number 1.
Okay.
Who's reviewing city policies? What review framework are they using? Like, I just don't know what that is. I'm not going to say that that's working or that that's a good thing or that it will take 12 months if I don't even know what it is.
For one, Cersei, we're working on centralizing our HR processes. So we have a new department. A lot of HR policies were decentralized and they're individual departments. We just hired an HR director and we're building a department. All the policies are under legal review, all personnel policies. So the plan is to have all the policies reviewed and screened for risk of bias. All personnel policies and practices.
I think Cersei is asking who's doing that.
I think it's, Mr. Mayor, I believe it's supposed to be the HR director, 1, and then 2, in-house legal counsel, who will review the legal side of it, and 3 would be me, who would then analyze that for potential bias risks. And I just wanted to add some context here that the reason why this is just a decision the task force needs to make, that if you get closer to the micromanagement of the HR department here, when they're centralizing their policies and practices, they've got a new HR director, they're going to be doing this evaluation and then doing additional training of their staff consistent with the approach identified here and also with the city's strategic plan, et cetera. So I think that you get to the point where you need to know exactly everything that they're doing. I don't know that you could even do that. So that's
like,
okay. I mean, I don't think we're trying to micromanage. I think we're trying to find out, what are you saying that we're recommending? Like, this is, until now, I've never heard anyone describe who's reviewing these city policies and how. And so maybe it's a different question. Maybe it's a question to Al and Steve, and then I'll let others go. Al and Steve, do you think your framework would be the sort of thing that would be the framework for reviewing? Like, I'm trying to understand because now we've combined these things. So I'll let it go. And Al, that's, if you want to get in line maybe to answer, that would be great.
Al, if you have a response to that, we'll have you respond and then I'll jump in. It looks like Jennifer's waiting and then Kara is waiting as well.
My response would be, one of the reasons we propose the equity change framework in the manner that you see it is we were also concluding that the city is growing rapidly with this focus anyway, and they have new personnel and new purchasing and a lot of things at play. And to distract them from becoming even more ready to adopt the equity lens in the manner that we're describing is going to take some time. And to slow things down with other burdens that have not been defined is not going to be moving us forward. And in retrospect, I would say, if we were just a little more ready at the outset, I think we would have evidence in our hand at the first meeting of this task force, and we would have known from the first step. Comfortable with not knowing, right now we're in a position where I think there's a lot of prudent steps occurring, and we just need it to play out and have timelines such as the police one on 12 to 18 months and other things. So
Thanks, Al. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you. With the first recommendation, some feedback I have and it is that it's, how do I say it? It's like it's a task. It's like a kind of like objectives and not the ultimate goal. And so like it's only really highlighting the review process. And I would like to see that there be more meat basically in it, in that the recommendation is for when it comes to policies and practices, that it's being reviewed and that there is a plan for modifications as needed. There's a plan for assessing whether those modifications worked or not, making adjustments, like on continuing and continuous improvement. And this just seems like it's more like a review. I mean, I can read a book and it could be a really bad book and I can, but if I could say I could write a review on that book, but if I want to make it better, I could, that needs to be part of it too. So I just want to, it just seems like it's not, it's not really reflecting, at least my thoughts based on the discussions that we've had of how intensive the policies and practices assess or like review and then implementation of changes is really going to be.
Kara, thank you. Oh, did we lose Kara?
No, I was muted, sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify that before I do any review, they're also being reviewed by our employment council. So they'll have two sets of eyes from legal as well as Kirsten's. And Jennifer, to your point, generally when we do the review, if we notice something that's not, I guess right now, as I'm being hired for in-house, I'm also reviewing our other policies as I have time to. And as I see something that is either, well, especially if it's illegal, but if it's also something that's outdated or impractical, those are things that we're pulling, and we are, as part of our review practice, we generally make those changes. Or if I see suggested changes that maybe they're not a requirement, but I see something that, hey, we could make this better. Those are things that we always bring forward. We never just let things go. It's not part of our work culture to let a bad book lie on our shelf.
And just in response to that, thank you. To not have a bad book lay on your shelf. But what I'm recommending then with these recommendations is to put that in writing, so that way there is no question. Like if you are a citizen reading this, do they understand that a review also means making it better? So I'm asking for some more language in there to help strengthen what this recommendation really is doing.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
Thanks, Jennifer. Go ahead, Tom. Tom Newkirk and then Tom Trahern.
Okay, so I just want to remind everyone that section 1 is about one thing that a city can do. There's nothing objectively offensive about the city's policies as they stand right now. There's nothing objectively overwhelmingly discriminatory about the city's approach to hiring and et cetera right now. This is clearly an improvement in terms of and the policies never solve anything. So you've got policies that lawyers will review, that HR will then refine and centralize. That's a good thing. B, that I then as a specialist in implicit bias will also review for potential risk points of bias. That's partly why I've been retained in this process. And then secondarily then the implementation of policies by staff in terms of making sure that the operation of discipline or bias, et cetera, is reduced will also be reviewed, will also be partly implemented by me and other individuals in terms of enhanced, increased training. And that's pretty much it. That's not rocket science. That's policies. You review them, you make them consistent with legal, you reduce risk for impact, which I will help do. And then you do the training and then you move forward. And then if you want to add the equity lens to it as well, which is somewhat different than bias reduction, you certainly can do that, and that's a good thing. But that's it. And so you can either, to Jennifer's point, I mean, if you want to add more language to it, flowerier language, more, you want me to say exactly what I just said, I can do that. But it's one of those things where if you keep writing and writing and writing to describe what may or may not be done when there's not necessarily some significant problem you're dealing with, and you're going to be reviewing this to fix it, the shorter is better. But again, you can certainly add more language to it, but I want to make sure everybody understands what the policy review is to do and the context of it.
Thanks, Tom. Tom Cheyenne. You're muted.
And again, I guess just to follow up with what Tom had said, I mean, as a task force, you know, we make a recommendation to council. When the council accepts the recommendation is when we fully put together the process upon which we do things. I mean, if we vetted everything down to the granular detail, I don't think that that's doing us any justice. The policy gets recommendation. The process upon which that occurs is managed internally. It's explained to the council, and then that's accepted over that period of time. We report out. If there's concerns with that report out, those will be made. If there's suggestions along the way, the idea that we have everything in our recommendation detailed down to the, down to the detail is just, at this point, the task force needs to get the recommendations in front of the council, get the support of the council, let staff work through those and explain how things are going to occur. But we can't do all of that without any direction from anybody. And I think that's critical to understanding. The general recommendations need to be supported by the council to proceed with providing staff the ability to get to the details and explain them and move them forward.
Thanks, Tom. Steve.
I just wanted to add on this, the policies and practice. I had the opportunity to ask a question of the city's HR director when the need to interview for the new city manager. And I asked, since the task force in the city are having a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, are you framing any questions or any interview questions for the candidates? And HR had assured me that yes, they are. That's the direction and policy that the city has taken. That's now incorporated in their process. Before when you didn't have an HR person, there wasn't somebody to address that specifically. And now that there is, I asked that question and I was reassured that's the direction the city is taking, and that would be, you have a candidate or candidates for that type of position, the city manager, and they are being asked those questions, then you would assume that anyone further down on the employment scale would also be looked at in that same view, going forward. So I think it's there and being practiced. We just have to recognize that. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Go ahead, Cersei.
So I'd like to move an amendment to the text under number 1, which would say in the second sentence, replace the second sentence with, the task force further recommends the city reviews policies and implementation of streamlined approaches to hiring and discipline using the equity change framework as described below.
Okay, so you made a motion, right? Is that what you did, Cersei?
I did, and I'm realizing, I'm sorry, let me just back up 1 second, because what I was doing is splitting the sentence into 2. The first is about the review, and then the second is about training. So I don't know if I need to continue it to talk about training. So for the moment, I'm happy to just stick with changing that to deal with the fact that the task force recommends that the city review policies and implementation of streamlined approaches to hiring and discipline using the equity change framework described below. And then I'll come back and I'll add a sentence about training. I'll propose an amendment to add a sentence about training.
Okay. Okay, so do we have a second for the amendment?
I'll
That you-
second that.
Al? Okay, so we've got, I gotta make sure I do this right. We've got a motion and a second to amend the policy, number 1 policy, to include reviewing the hiring and discipline practices using the equity change framework. Is that accurate, Cersei?
That recommends that the city review policies and implementation streamline approaches. I'm really just using your sentence, so.
Okay, okay,
Mhm.
got it. Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Okay, so now we are voting on the amendment, right? Do I have that right, Amal?
Yep.
Okay, so all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. Okay, so does that mean that the language is now amended, right, Amal?
Correct.
Okay, now Cersei, did you have something else regarding that?
I would like to make a second motion to add a sentence about training, but I have questions about that first and would like just if Amal or someone could explain to us. You were talking about the process of increased training that will begin this fall and will be ongoing. Can you tell us what that is?
If I speak to that, Amal, briefly, I would say
And
that
can I just clarify Tom's role on the task force? Are we, because you've really been advocating for positions, which I actually feel is inappropriate. I'm happy to have you answer some stuff, but I just want clarity on your role, if I could.
I'm advocating for positions that I believe will further the goal of the task force and also the rights of individual persons to be free from bias and discrimination. That's what I advocate for. My role on this is because since I'm going to be doing the training, that's why I would offer it. I offer perspective on what it is, but Amal can certainly talk about the budgeting and planning for the additional training.
Cersei, was your question about what the training would be or more
Yeah,
logistics?
it says there's a process of increased training and I'd like to know what
Okay.
that.
Okay, so Amal or Tom, who can answer her question about what will that training be?
I believe our goal is to reduce bias, implicit bias, and raise awareness and celebrate diversity.
And how many hours of training or do you have any details about it?
We don't have the specifics yet.
Go ahead, Tom. You're muted, Tom. We can't hear you.
Again, I think before, we haven't engaged in a program or a process. You have to understand that we don't actively pursue the granular details of these items until we have council authorization to spend the time putting the training together. I'm sure the police chief probably has training that he knows about that's going to be happening. I mean, there are things that go on that are already happening. And to really have a roadmap moving this forward today, when it's just the task force making a recommendation to the full council who authorizes the spending, the budget, the process, the training, we're just not at that point. This gives us direction by the city council to proceed to put those programs together. That's how this works. So for us to come together with a full program laid out and ready to go just isn't going to happen until the council gives us direction to proceed.
Okay,
Correct.
go ahead.
And the purpose of our review is equity with the goal of improvement. And I believe we don't want to focus on semantics and language here. We want to get the point we were trying to come up with as a recommendation in terms of concepts to council for further consideration. So the point would be training.
And I would note that, the real purpose of my being here has been to train. I'm just following up on Amal's point, if I may, Ms. Dumbo, that
I have my
I have-
hand up, actually, no, you're out of order.
Can we hold on for just a second, please? Amal, you had given us a response, and Tom was responding to your response, and Cersei, you have been waiting to respond. So Cersei, we'll hear from you, then we'll hear from Tom, and then I need to just ask a few questions before we continue to move forward this evening. So go ahead, Cersei.
Yeah, and where'd you go, Tom, City Manager Tom? You know, we actually do, we put forward to you all a recommendation, a one-sentence recommendation about training. And I'm going to make the amendment to put it in here as our recommendation. You are asking us to make a recommendation to City Council about training. I needed to know what that recommendation is. I'm not trying to micromanage. I'm trying to say, you need training of city staff. It needs to be substantive. It needs to cover certain things. And we believe that the City Council should fund it. I'm all behind that. I think it's a fabulous thing. I needed to know what that was. So I would actually propose an amendment to number 1. And I got to get back to my language because I want to share language that you've seen before so that I'm not bringing up something brand new. So pardon me as I find it. I would like to propose now, after the sentence we just voted on, that we add that we recommend the city employees undergo training and implicit bias for at least 8 hours per year over the course of the year, not just one time per year, connected to ongoing systems of internal support and accountability, ideally including job-embedded coaching. So that's I'm proposing that as an amendment to the recommendation number 1.
So
For minute purposes, can you please repeat that?
I can. The task force recommends the city requires all city employees to undergo ongoing training in implicit bias for at least 8 hours per year over the course of the year, not just one time, and connected to ongoing systems of internal support and accountability, ideally including job-embedded coaching.
Job-embedded coaching.
okay. Al, I see you've got your hand up. Do I have a second on the motion that has been made?
Second.
Okay. Discussion about the motion to add language that Cersei has brought forward, and I was writing fast and furiously, Cersei. So all city employees participate in implicit ongoing bias or ongoing implicit bias training 8 hours a year over the course of the year, not just one time. To ongoing systems of support and I think accountability, embedded accountability.
Is that it?
We are the first, it's first and second to amend the first recommendation to include that language. Any discussion around that? Al, Tom, Jennifer, or Cersei, are you raising your hands for discussion around that? So I've got 2 of you are. Mayor, I see you want to jump in here as well. Okay. All right, we'll start with the mayor since we haven't heard his voice yet, right? That was kind of our game plan here. So go ahead, Mayor, and then we'll circle back around.
Well, I appreciate the discussion tonight. My question on this is I need to see it. I mean, I was trying to furiously write it down.
Yep.
It's kind of hard to vote on something without seeing the whole thing and being able to think about it. I wanted to ask Tom Newkirk what his thoughts are on having a specific number of hours. I wanted to ask our city staff, what their input is on a recommendation like that. And I just want to reiterate what Tom Trahorn was saying. The way it works, I mean, this may be beneficial for everyone to know, but for the city staff to dedicate time and resources towards something, because they have lots of competing priorities, they look for direction from the city council. So these recommendations should make the point clear to the city staff, if the city council adopts them, that this is a priority and these are things we want you to work on. And then that gives them the direction to put together their work plans, which is what Tom was talking about, their work plans, then spell out all the details. And that's where all the detail comes out. So I hope that makes sense to everyone, but I want to know what Tom Newkirk thinks about this amendment.
Okay, we'll go to Tom and then we'll circle around here, I think.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Tom.
Let me see if I can say this in the right way. As I noted, the real purpose of my retention has been to offer my expertise and specialization in addressing implicit bias in law enforcement in the city to ensure the practices are meeting the highest standards of reducing that as a risk. That's one. The process of consulting on the task force was also basically part of the deal as well, but I really need to be spending my time doing it. I appreciate what Cersei's proposed. I do, Ms. Dumbo, appreciate what you proposed. But first of all, when I haven't had a chance to do recommendations on training because it hasn't been approved, budgeted, planned, and I haven't been, assigned the role of go do that right now. That's what I want to do instead of spending time doing this. And so I would tell you that I might recommend more than 8 hours of training. On the other hand, I also tell you that my approach to training is highly efficient and effective, meaning that you don't just train people for 8 hours or 16 hours for the purpose of doing so. You have to be able to identify the key risk points that exist within a system, the key likely sources of bias that would flow through that system, and then to develop training, not only on implicit bias, but cultural awareness that can raise awareness within the workforce as a whole, and therefore allow it to stick for those individuals. So I might recommend more than 8 hours of training. I don't know what, everyone has different flowery words they use for their training. So ongoing systems and job embedded coaching, that's specific to what Ms. Dumbo's familiar with, someone else is familiar with. Why would you want to superimpose a specific requirement of what someone else views as important over what my recommendations may be? Or maybe my recommendations to include other people to train as well, that may include some of those ideas. And so my point is, you don't want to, I don't mean to use the word micromanaging appropriately, seriously, it's not what I mean. I'm simply saying you can't come in and try and predefine the specific level of training or policy review when you have hired an individual who has expertise in analyzing bias risks at a very high level, and then we'll apply that information to the city. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to carry this far beyond whatever a few words of recommendation are going to be. And that's the commitment I'm making. It's commitment the mayor's making. It's commitment that the city's making as a whole. So I think that's what I would offer in response to the mayor's comment.
Al,
So,
do you have a comment regarding the motion that's on the table?
yes, I do.
Okay.
Number one, I don't think it's in the purview of where we are now to be prescriptive. I think we're setting direction. And I think in the equity change framework, there's a statement in there in regard to all of it, and it says impactful training. And I think we have a highly motivated staff, and hopefully the city council will see their way forward. And we don't need to design what competent, high-purpose people are seeking to do. And there are many inputs and avenues for individuals to give advice later. So.
Okay. Thanks, Al. Jennifer, you're next in line.
I actually, Tom and Al said better than I probably could have what I wanted to say. And that was, I'm in agreement that I don't want to get too specific in this kind of recommendation, because there are going to be some trainings that are going to be needed, and we can't say how many hours, or, but I think that the ideas of being ongoing, the ideas of being good, you know, well, good quality is important, and that it encompasses multiple, the encompasses so many issues within diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, so that it is looking race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, you know, all of those different classes. So I'm leery about having something that is so specific, because we might find that we want actually more than 8 hours. So
Thanks, Jennifer. Go ahead, Cersei.
Thank you. And Mayor, I appreciate your concern about not having it in front of you. This is what we put forward at the very beginning. It's exactly that same language. And we actually might like to have changed it, but because we'd already put it forward, we decided it was better to just stay with the language that you've had for all of these months and to work through that. The language says at least 8 hours. It does not say specifically 8 hours. And remember, this is a recommendation we're making to the city council. The city council is the one that ultimately will decide what it looks like and that sort of thing. The important part of this, as a professional who does this sort of work and who understands deeply the research on the impact of training, is that you've got to have distributed practice over time. You've got to have opportunities to try out changes and get feedback on them. That when you add coaching to a training program, you go from a 5% implementation take-up to an 85% implementation take-up. The research is very, very clear about the components of training that make a difference. So we're not prescribing it has to be this or that. We're saying these are the ways we define high quality. What we were told before is that departments sent individuals to a training, which was 2 hours in duration, and then they were sent back to train everyone else. That is wholly insufficient to try to support the processes it takes to overcome the influence of implicit bias. What this recommendation says is that is wholly insufficient. We need something much more substantive. It needs to be for a much longer duration than 2 hours. It needs to be distributed over time, and it needs to have a system of support surrounding it, ideally job embedded coaching. That's a recommendation we give to the city council. They get it scoped out, they get it priced. We don't do those things as a task force. We say it matters deeply to us. And I'm sorry, Tom, that you don't want to be in this conversation with the community about this work. I think this conversation is extremely important, and I'm choosing to do this rather than other work that I'm getting paid to do. So, I recognize folks are frustrated. We're getting to the nitty gritty. You're asking us to give recommendations to the city council. We take that very seriously.
Thank you, Cersei. Tom Trahorn. And
Yeah,
then Chief.
I just think it's important that as we look at this, I think we got to leave the options open for the council and for the staff and then with the consultants that we hired to make that recommendation to the city council and work it out on the front end after a recommendation is made, and not proceed with getting into the granular. That's all I'll say.
Thanks, Tom. Chief.
Sorry. Hey, I just want to clarify something on the train the trainer, Cersei. That was 2 hours was given to the officers here. The actual train the trainer was 2 or 3 days that we sent officers up to. It's spread out. Right now, we've got it lined up to give during our twice annual in-service trainings. We're just trying to figure out how we can spread that out, but training times of a premium, and so we're squeezed for time. But I just want to make that clarification.
Thanks, Chief. Tom Newkirk.
Ms. Stumbo is exactly right that the 2 hour training and the training being done is is wholly, and it's not enough. And I'm going to be speaking to the city and the chief about expanding their training to make it more effective. With respect, though, to Ms. Stumbo, she's incorrect that anything that she listed in that sentence is actually going to reduce implicit bias. There's zero evidence that training at different levels actually reduces implicit bias over the long term. There's other ways to go about controlling it, managing it. And that makes it, and that's what my suggestion is going to be to the city. So that's all I wanted to note. But you're correct, Ms. Stumbo, that, you know, it is a recommendation and doesn't mean we can't go much farther. That's true.
Thanks, Tom. Cersei.
So we can dispute the research, and I'd be happy to have that conversation, and I'm happy to share research evidence to the task force if people want it. And thank you, Chief. That was a very helpful clarification.
Okay. Al?
I call the question, please.
Thank you.
All right. Are we ready? Looks like we are ready to vote. So the amendment that was brought forward by Cersei, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no.
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 No,
So the amendment does not pass. At this juncture, it's almost 6:15. And we set out to, based on the work that we did over the last several months in our conversation last time, a couple of weeks ago, that we would walk away this meeting perhaps with a set of recommendations to bring forward to the city council. At this point, we are not at a place to send forward a set of recommendations. I do think that it's important for us to think about perhaps timeline and process and where we plan to go in the next meeting. So Amal, can you provide any insights about sort of process and information to help us with kind of where we go?
Today, I was hoping that we can come to a conclusion with a set of recommendations to council. Reason is we are working on budget development and departments are requesting their budget as we speak. And those recommendations will have budget impact. If we wanna really get going with starting on scheduling those changes or giving council enough time to consider and make decisions, the budget timeline is set for us by the state. And according to that timeline, in November 2nd, we will be discussing budget goals and guidelines with council. And in January, we'll be working on final considerations of our budget, our recommended budget for to be adopted before we can submit to the state.
So budget and the timeline of the budget will be impacted, of course, by this work. Steve and Cersei, I see your hands raised. I'll get to you in just a second. What I then would suggest is that our next meeting, which is, Alicia, do you have the date sort of on the top of your mind here? That we continue this conversation with the goal of.
Sorry to interrupt. Your
okay.
next meeting is supposed to be November 11th, but because that is a city holiday, it was moved to November 17th, which is a Wednesday.
Okay. So November 17th, that would be the meeting that we would perhaps be at a place where we can vote on a set of recommendations because it will have budget implications. So I hear you on that, Amal, and the importance of making sure that, right, be thinking I'm on city council and that we'll be making decisions on how we're spending our dollars. This will impact that budgeting process. So certainly want to make sure those recommendations are in front of us so we can make the appropriate decisions regarding budgeting. Okay, go ahead, Steve. Thanks for waiting.
Real quick, I didn't know if the possibility existed of a special meeting in like 2 weeks, because I see this thing going on again, and we're not, unless you extend the 1 hour commitment to the meeting to a couple of hours, we're not going to get done in our next meeting. So I don't know if it's possible to have a special meeting in 2 weeks to hammer this out. If we're going to go line by line, paragraph by paragraph, the November meeting is not going to get everything accomplished.
Totally. I agree with you, Steve. So thank you for bringing that forward, right? Is there the opportunity to extend the time that we're meeting and perhaps a special meeting, right? That is maybe sooner than the November 17th. Go ahead, Amal.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. So do we have to help me with this one? How do we make that decision? If we want to put an additional meeting on the books and extend the timing from maybe 60 minutes to 120 minutes, what's the process in doing that, Amal?
I believe just taking a look at availability.
Okay.
A time that works for most people.
Okay. So Alicia, I was going to ask Alicia if she could help us with the doodle poll to figure that out. Go ahead, Cersei, you raised your hand.
Just that I have November 18th as the date. So I don't know if other people have the 18th or is it the 17th?
It's the 17th because the 18th is our city council meeting.
Okay.
So next steps, Ben, would be for Alicia to see if we could find an alternate date where we could meet for 120 minutes. If we couldn't, then I would advocate November 17th, we extend that meeting from 60 minutes to 120 minutes. Does that seem like option A, option B? Okay. Getting some head nods, some thumbs up. Okay. Okay, let's proceed with that. And Alicia, you would send out the updated set of recommendations for the upcoming meeting, right? Based on what we approved this evening.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, yep. I think that'd be really helpful for folks to have. Go ahead, Tom Trahern, did you have a question?
Just a question. I don't know if we're missing anyone on this call, but I would agree that a special meeting is certainly warranted. And I think keeping it top of mind would be even better since we're kind of in the conversation. I don't know if we can just look at our calendars and just pitch out like next Wednesday or kind of pick a night. I know we don't really want to beat around the bush too much, but if there's an easy answer, that might be a way to accommodate a meeting sooner, if there would be willingness to have that conversation. Just a question to the group.
Sure, you're right, Tom. We don't want to spend 30 minutes figuring this out, but if we could figure it out quickly tonight and get it on the books, that's a great idea. Cersei and then Chief.
Oh, sorry, I didn't lower my hand. I would just
that's okay.
Not do it on Wednesday night because that's church night for folks including.
Okay, so Wednesday night, not a great night. Chief, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just advocate for whenever we do it, we pack a lunch and just grind through this, because I don't know that 2 hours is going to be enough.
Okay.
I would say let's just plan on staying until we're done. And if that means we have to take a couple of potty breaks and, I would be for that.
Okay. I think that sounds like a nice idea too. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I would just, while I agree with the chief, because it's, I would love to be able to just barrel through this. If we're starting out in the evening hours, as a single mom that barely gets to see her kid the way it is, that's awfully hard to just say we're going to barrel through another night. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about how this is going to, how we're going to schedule this. And I mean, do we need to look at a weekend instead of an evening? So it's not after all of us have or, some of whoever has come from work or something like that. Or do we need to just look at some other alternatives?
Okay, so I think let's do this. Alicia, if you will send out a doodle poll and, see if we can give some options of maybe starting at a 4 o'clock hour instead of 5 o'clock hour. Maybe there's a weekend option in there, and we'll see where we can get the largest number of folks to commit. And perhaps instead of marking it for 120 minutes, maybe we should see sort of if folks are available for a 2.5 hour block, and then we'll go from there. But boy, we can't, it's going to be, I think, hard to keep people engaged much longer than that. That's tough. So Alicia, will you help us do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll
Okay.
send out a doodle poll with a wide variety of options.
Okay, that's great. Okay. With that, yes, go ahead, Mayor.
Okay, I just have a couple of things before we go. I want to just go back and just clarify the vote on the amendment regarding the training. I just want to make clear, and I think I speak for everyone who didn't vote for it, but people can speak for themselves. But for myself, it's not that we don't believe training is important or enough training is, they need enough training and the right kind of training. But when you're sending a policy recommendation to the city council, it is a policy of just what is important to us, what we want the staff to work on. And we want to make the recommendation that training is key and is important. And we let the professionals determine the details, which is our HR staff, which is our consultant, which is our excellent staff and the department heads. And so we'll leave the details to them as to how much training and how it happens, because they're the professionals, they're the experts. I just want to remind everyone, I really appreciate all the discussion tonight. I know it's getting emotional. People are very emotional and committed to this subject, and it's a very important subject. I just want to remind everyone we're all on the same side. We all want the same end result. We have to continue to see the best in each other and to give each other the benefit of the doubt. I don't believe there's anybody who's here spending all this time who doesn't want the same result as everybody else in this meeting, and doesn't want our city to be the absolute best that it can be when it comes to equity and inclusion and being a welcoming community and treating everyone fairly and valuing every individual that lives in our community. So I just want to want everyone to keep that at the forefront and to give each other the benefit of the doubt and to see the best in each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And with that, what a great way to end our evening with one another. We will see you hopefully relatively soon, sooner than November 17th. Have a really good rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.